Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you've got questions, we've got answers or ideas or at least opinions. So anyway, go ahead and ask those questions there. You can use Makana, of course. You can ask questions. You can vote those questions up and down. You can chat with each other. Or if you're not in Makana, you can use askofficehours.global. That's askofficehours.global, and that will last 24/7. So if you put them in during the show, we're going to try to get to them during the show. So you can put them in right now. But if you're watching this later, a lot of people do, you can put your questions in any time during the hour or during the day, and we'll get to them as soon as we can in the next couple of days. Just make sure that the questions are well formed, and also make sure that there's one question. So if you stack a bunch of questions up, we might not answer it. So just one question per submission there. So if you see 2 question marks in your question, think about 2 of them. Anyway, so take a look at that. Right now, we're going to go ahead and jump into those questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one comes from Mike Edwards in Brooklyn. He says, morning, everyone. Building out a camera station, in this case an Ursa Broadcast G2 with a slider, and wanted to give the camera op a high chair with backing. What options does the panel suggest?
Good, Bill.
When it comes to chairs, here's a couple of things I always look for something to use in production. Number one, I do not want wheels on the bottom of it. I want it a fixed position chair. I do not want it to rotate because I often use the same thing in the studio, and if people fidget in them all the time, and they can get squeaky as well, and that'll be distracting for things. Most of the time when I was doing camera op stuff, I would be on some kind of a riser. That's another good reason not to put wheels on it. You want something that you can really lock down so that you have no chance of falling off a riser or something like that. But those are the main things I look for. So simpler is better. You want something that is comfortable because often a camera op, particularly in a conference kind of circumstance, may spend 4 or 5 hours out of a day in that chair. And if it isn't properly padded and reasonable to be comfortable in, they'll get fidgety, and that takes their mind off of their shots, which is not a good thing. So those are just the general rules I consider when I'm looking for a high chair for a camera op.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I understand what you say about the wheels and a platform, but a lot of camera operators need to move around a little bit to pan, far left or far right. And if you look at there's a lot. Uline has a lot of these lab stools that are adjustable in height easily and go up high, and they have a back on them, and they're not too high profile or too heavy, and they do have wheels, and they have some, of course, that you can take the wheels off and just put feet on them if you're on a platform or something. But something like this, or if you just look for bar stools, there's a lot of them that are out there that have backs and are adjustable in height, so that an operator can bring it up and sit down and rest their back if they're sitting in one place for a long time.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from David Brady in New York City, and David says, Sub 2R has a pair of cameras coming out that utilize the Sony STARVIS Micro Four Thirds sensor and more. Thoughts? And he says the specs are at the bottom of the page to his link there.
Yeah, and so here's the camera. It looks pretty interesting as a as a kind of a fixed camera for a system or into a as a web camera. It could be really impressive. So here's some of the stats there. So it is MFT interchangeable. The resolution 4K 60 and 1080p 60. So it's got 13 stops estimated of dynamic range, 422 12-bit color, which is pretty interesting. SDI output. So this has got a lot of potential to it. Sub 2R does a lot of really cool custom cameras, as well as making a green screen. And so I think that this could be really interesting. I was trading some notes with them yesterday, the day before, and we're going to try to go over. We're going to try to have them over at the booth at some point to show some stuff off. So stay tuned for that. But we'll jump into that camera. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
What were those 2 sensors on either side? Were those microphones, or are they ultrasonic range sensors for autofocus?
I don't know. So this is, I have this picture, and
they look like ultrasonic transducers.
They look like they could be. They could be either mics or they could be some kind of rangefinder. Yeah. So I don't know.
That's not in the specs, though. Huh?
It's not listed in the specs. So okay. They're just showing it off at the moment. There's not a ship date for them, but it says that it offers. I'm trying to. It says it offers live processing purity made possible by 1200 hand measure. We'll find out. we'll get them onto the booth and we'll talk to them. We'll interrogate them. That'll be your job, Courtney, a little bit later. Sometime next night. Yeah.
I'll come on the little screen and say, hey,
so what is going on? What are those
Send
things?
a crew out to the corner where Sony's located at NAB this year.
Yeah, exactly.
Far reaches.
All right, next question.
Next one comes to us from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. Microsoft is releasing ARM processor laptops next month, and they claim they will beat Apple's M3 performance. Thoughts on the Snapdragon X Elite processors?
Good, Mark.
Well, I think a lot of this has to do with how Apple has tightly wound their operating system into the processor. And is Microsoft going to be able to do the same thing? And the real question here is what does this spell for Intel if everyone starts moving to ARM?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And if they can actually, I'd love to see some competition here. So it's a good thing to see what happens. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, my problem has been with Windows for ARM has not been as full-featured as the Intel-based Windows. And
that's the nicest way I've ever seen anybody say that. Like not a complete
I
dumpster fire.
criticize Windows every now and then. Come on, Alex.
No, I'm just saying it very nicely because I just, because Windows for ARM has been a dumpster fire. Like it
has been, yeah. Well, because it hasn't been full-featured, and they tried this before, and whether or not, and of course, I think because of Apple. Because they want to be able to run Windows on Apple hardware, which they've been able to do with the Parallels and Windows, and Windows for ARM. This may be a place to expand out that tiny little market of ARM computers to something. And the Snapdragon X Elite has been, at least tested to be as powerful as the Apple hardware. Whether or not they can customize Windows enough to directly drive that hardware remains to be seen.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, PreSonus has introduced Studio One Plus Hybrid, which is a subscription plan, but it has a perpetual license you can keep if you stop your subscription. Thoughts? And he's got a link to it there.
I think everybody's trying to figure this out. I'm trying to figure it. And the problem is they have a web page. You got to see this web page just keeps changing, so I can't find I have to wait for it to come back around again.
No,
here it
too
is.
much
Here's
HTML.
Oh my gosh, it just drives me crazy when people do this. I just want to go to a page and find the thing. Here we go. All right. So you can do monthly, you can do pro, upgrade a previous version, perpetual, and animal. And so it's $179 a year. Yours to keep.
But the perpetual pro is
the Studio One
$149?
Plus. So the Studio One Plus is something you're paying a subscription for. No, it says they're both yours to keep. I guess they're at $179 a year. I guess they've decided that's as much as they need to get from you. I don't know. I think that the hard part you get into is if you start creating market confusion, it doesn't necessarily buy you anything. And I think that they've just created a whole new vertical that none of us understand.
Maybe you're just paying. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe that $179 just pays for updates, and as long as you're paying the $179 a year, you get updated versions. If you stop paying it, you're frozen at whatever version you last.
Yeah,
that's possible.
I guess there's extra features, add-ons, benefits of Studio One membership. So the other membership stuff that's related to it is what they're saying you can keep on getting if you pay the subscription, but you can keep the software itself for the $179. I think it's if you pay $179, they've got you for the software. Like that's the perpetual. You're buying what they're saying. I think is you're buying a perpetual license for the software right out of the gate, and then you have a subscription that can help you out with other things. I think it's a very confusing way to do it, but they could have just had it be an extra thing that you buy with your software. Anyway, I think it's confusing. Next question.
Next one comes from our old friend Hasma Gajar in Cape Town, South Africa. AL uses the Sony FX30 as his webcam. Key is the autofocus. How do you manage... Oh, Alex Lindsay, that's what he meant. Obviously, I was thinking AI. How do you manage to lock the focus since you are the talent and there is no assistant?
There is no lock on my FX30. So if I go like this, it's not locked, and then it's not locked. So it just goes back and forth from what it has. So that's been useful for me. I don't want to lock it. I want it to move in. There is the one challenge is if I want to show you something, I have to make it's very cute on my eyes. I have to cover my eyes, or if it sees as soon as it sees my eyes, it'll jump to me. Like it doesn't matter if it sees the whole face or not. It's like, oh, eyes. I need to go get those. And so so when I show something to the camera, I have to make sure that that I cover my eyes. But outside of that, I'm not trying to. If your face is anywhere, as you can see, if your face is anywhere in the screen, it's going to find it. And if you don't want that, then I'd have to work on some other solutions for that. But that's why I use these Sony cameras, is because they're good at doing that one thing. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington. And Guy says, what's new in the Blackmagic Camera 1.3 update? And he's got a link to it.
Good, Mark. I can't hear you, Mark. I don't know if you're trying to talk there.
So it has the support for the connected earphones. It has support for rack-mounted focus. It supports the 48mm lens on a 14 and Pro and 15 Pro. And it says it has smoother animations when switching between landscape and portrait.
Yeah, and it also reduced latency for HDMI feeds, which is good as well. So that's and just general, yeah. So it's incremental, and that's great. Like it just keeps on kind of working its way through that process. Right now, it's the industry leader for the iPhone, at least, and so I think that if they keep on, adding sane updates every couple months, they'll do well. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas up next. Would this be an adequate TV cart for my not an LED wall TCL 98-inch class S5 S-Class 4K UHD HDR LED smart TV with Google, and that's model 98S550G?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Nick. Oh, can't hear you, Nick.
It would have been fine until you added the weight of the Google TV part, and now it's not enough. No, that cart looks perfectly good. It's rated for up to 120-inch, so you've got headroom there. I'm not sure of the weight of your television, but I can't imagine that it's close to 300 pounds. I have a 100-inch planar screen in front of me, and it is 300 pounds. And I expect that the TCL is quite a bit less. And so it looks like a really good cart. Honestly, one of my favorite things about this one, I haven't seen this one before, but I like the adjustable speaker shelves, which don't have to be speaker shelves. They could be something that you keep the remote on, because for me, the nightmare is finding the remote every time you've wheeled the cart around. When we have every screen in our studios is on wheels, and they travel up and down the halls all the time for different classrooms and different studio needs. And it's finding the remote that's the biggest nightmare. So, I think this looks like a nice cart, but I haven't used it myself.
And I'm a big fan of Velcro on the remote and Velcro on the back of the TV. And we just go, like it just keeps sticking it to the TV. And if you see it anywhere else, you're like, hey, there's Velcro on there for a reason. So
first order accessibility.
Yeah. Sorry?
It's first order accessibility, as Adam Savage would say.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I agree with you. Velcro on the back is the way to go with the remotes. This, another nice thing now, I know Paul's probably not going to be using this, but it has a little platform at the top here, and I wonder if that floats up and down as you raise and lower it, so you could put a camera over the top, or you could use a backlight if you're using it as trying to figure that out. You could mount your backlight over the.
So that's actually, I have a stand that has one of those, and it is intended as a camera platform. Yeah. So I have on one of our stands that has that. If you go to one of the other images that has the stand without the television, you'll see that that's bolted on with an arm to the crossbar, and it is height adjustable. It's not pneumatic, and it's not on a linear actuator at all, but you can place a PTZ camera up there or another webcam up there. Or I hadn't thought of the idea of putting lighting up there. That's an interesting approach too.
The thing is massive, until you see a picture of it with a guy standing. I don't know if that's real.
It's pretty big.
It doesn't.
Don't try to fly with it.
They Photoshop that in. Yeah, the one that we just got, actually, that we're going to use at the booth is this one here. And I have to admit that it was This one, and we put it together, and it's very solid. We didn't bother to put the shelf on, and we didn't put this top part on. But now that it's explained, we may rethink that to put the PTZ up there. But we were planning to put the PTZ in the front. We're pretty happy with this one. I like the round. These are pretty easy to adjust as far as this goes. But yeah, there's that platform there, and we were like, I don't think we need that. Like, we're trying to minimize what we have to build at the thing. We were like, So, but now. We literally couldn't figure out what you'd do with that platform. Like, why do all these TVs have these little shelves on the top? Like, it's a new thing since last time I bought a stand. Go ahead, Mark.
So in our conference room, we have a wall mount that has that stand on the top, and we just put a PTZ camera for when we have to do a Zoom together in a conference meeting. The only thing was the platform was smaller than the base of the PTZ, so we just connected a little block of wood in there to mount it on there.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I looked at it. I think that was part of what it was. I was like, this would be good for a camera if it wasn't so small, but it's really designed for one of those little like Cisco office cameras, not for the Sony FX30.
The other thing you could do with it is put the cable box up there, because it'll raise it for your IR remote control over the level of like classroom heads that can impede the IR remote control. Yeah. So that's another option.
It's interesting. Next question.
Ian Alford in London is up next. Have a couple of Blackmagic 4K cameras attached over HDMI to an ATEM. I want to extend the distance from the ATEM to the camera by using SDI. How can I retain the ability to control the camera from the ATEM for shading?
Nick?
Yeah, so Blackmagic has two microconverters. Well, it's a single microconverter. You're going to want to buy two of them, and they're bidirectional SDI to HDMI connectors. And that way you'll be able to run a pair of SDI cables between them, HDMI on one end to the ATEM, HDMI on the other end to the camera, and that bidirectional feature of those particular converters will allow your ATEM control to go over it. I mean, the other alternative is to get an SDI ATEM and still use one of those converters, and you should be able to do camera control. Again, you'll need out of the SDI ATEM into that bidirectional, as well as from that bidirectional back to the ATEM for a source.
Next question.
Ronnie Hafsaway in Tromsø, Norway. How should the Nobe Omniscope Waveform look like for a perfect green screen setup? How should Omniscope be configured, and what values should we go for?
It's a great question. I think we've talked about it a little bit in the past. I'm not sure if I talked about it exactly in the values, but there's two things that you're looking for typically when you're setting these things up, and that is, you have your RGB parade, and the most important signal for a green screen tuning is the RGB parade. But the waveform is also useful, and the reason for that is the waveform is a lot wider than the RGB parade, so you can see things. The RGB parade will make things look much worse than they actually are. So when you look at the waveform, if you think about a waveform here, what you want to see is that this is just the overall values. You want to see it be as flat as possible, and typically it's going to be about between 70 and 80% is where you're going to try to have that line. And what you might see a little bit of a dip on either side. What you want to avoid is seeing things that look like, seeing things that when you see the green, what you don't want is to see this. You don't want to see, this. You don't want to see this. These are all the things that you see when you do this kind of waveform. So what you want to do is you're going to want to you want to see it go straight across, and then you're looking for the thickness of this as well. So the straight across means that you're evenly lit, but the thickness will tell you if there's any kind of gradient from top to bottom. So what you're looking for is how thick. If it's a really thick line there, then you've got a lot of variance going across the horizontal, going vertical. So this tells you horizontal, like what's going to happen across. And the thickness of that line is going to tell you any kind of gradients in the vertical realm. So you want this line to be as thin as possible. I usually try to make sure the line is the line itself is less than 5% wide. So when you're looking at 100% IRE, less than 5% is what I'm shooting for. And I want it to be completely straight across, all the way to the edges if I can. Sometimes you'll have a little bit of drop off, there. Now, this is for interviews. This is in a perfect situation. I mean, obviously, when you do visual effects and you're doing a cove, you try to get as close as you can. So anyway, so now with the RGB parade, what you want to do is you have three things here. So you have your red, you have your green, and you have your blue here. And so what you want to do is you want to maximize. The green is going to be sitting at about 70%. So that's where you want your green up here like this at about 70%. You want to maximize the difference between your red value and your blue value here. So those are the things you want to kind of maximize as you look at that. So the greater the distance between this, the better. And what you're looking for, typically what you're shooting for, is a minimum of 40%. So a minimum of 40 points between the green and the red and the blue. It's hard to get that, just so you know. Like, it's a hard number to arrive at with white lights. A lot of times what we do is we use green, what we call green on green, which is super dangerous, but really useful if you get good at it. So green on green will get you still want that green at 70%. If you make it over 70%, it's going to start to bloom over top of your foreground. And because you have to remember that green screen is a huge light source. That's a big diffuse light source. So the further away you get from that green screen is important. But when you look at that green here, what you want to do is you're going to have that green stay still at about 70%. But when you use green on green, you're going to see these blue levels and the red levels are going to be down here. They're going to be almost nothing. And that's going to give you a really high separation. And when you're doing this, when we do interviews and we have lots of these, and let's say we used to do 10 hours a week, 10 to 11 hours a week of interviews. And when you're churning that out and you need it to be semi-automatic, what we learned was to be really, really touchy about that green screen. And this is how we got good at it, was to hit those numbers pretty hard. And so those are the numbers that I work on. And again, if they're great for people sitting down or standing in front of an interview. As soon as you add the floor, as soon as you add a cove, all those things start to move a little bit. Those are the targets in a perfect world. But know that it'll vary a little bit as the green screen becomes more complex. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, and I was going to say, number one, all of that is literal gold. The one important consideration is to make sure you dial in your white balance for your subject first, so that you know this is the white balance that you're going to use in that camera, and now you're evaluating those RGB values with the white balance setting that you're intending to use with the camera. And again, that should be dialed in for the subject, because if you're just looking at green and RGB and then you get it all dialed in perfect, and then you put your subject down and tungsten lights are all looking golden, and as soon as you change the white balance, everything you just did with those parades is out the window. So keep an eye on that. And the big thing is that, like Alex was mentioning, it's not so much how high is the green, but it's how, the difference between that green value and the red and the blue, and in particularly the red, because all of our skin tones have a degree of red in them, and we're valuing that difference. We're depending on that for that clean key. And the bigger that difference between green and red and green and blue is, the more fine detail you'll be able to mine out of your key, especially in the wispy hairs, this is why my hair is this way. I have a head for compositing, so.
All right. But yeah, what we're exactly what Nick is kind of outlining there is that what makes a good key is not that you can get rid of the background. What makes a good key is what happens to the edges when you get rid of that background. What happens to it's the edges. So when I'm looking at someone's composite, I'm immediately looking at their hair. If they've got a soft shirt on, I'm looking at what those edges look like. That's all I'm looking for. Anybody can do the other part, so I'm like, man, okay. But it's the fine details. It's the semi-transparency. It's all these other things. Like when you hand the file, the key that I just showed you, or if you have those in Omniscope, then you hand that to Ultimatte, it'll key water in a glass perfectly. Like when you give something really powerful, you're like, well, I have Ultimatte, it'll just work. Or I just have a good keyer, it'll just work. Sure, but if you don't lean on it, if you give it some great content ahead of time, it'll just work better. And a lot better. And so it's really, really worth, again, in visual effects, things may be a little bit different, but if you're doing interviews, and the other thing to remember is that where is that green screen perfect? If I have a person, I'm going to show their feet. I'm not worried about their feet. I'm keen. I'm gonna try to get the green as good as I possibly can down below. Sometimes I'll underexpose that because I don't want all that green to be bouncing up onto them. So I won't necessarily worry about it because I know that I can roto out their legs, because there's no, unless they're furry, unless they have furry legs for some costume, I don't need to worry about I can roto that out if I have to. What I'm really trying to do is separate their hair, all the top things, all the things you're going to really be focused on. So those are things to kind of think out. The only time you have to worry about the feet is if you're going to try to key shadow, which is really hard. But if you're trying to pull the shadow and put it back onto something, that can be a little more complicated. Next question.
Zach Stahl-Smith in Chautauqua, New York, up next. Thank you, Office Hours, for all the advice on getting NDI Bridge set up. I've been able to successfully connect my production network with multiple NDI sources to my home network. Would there be any opportunities for remote NDI op gigs with this setup?
I think that there's always a market there for a lot of these things. It's just a matter of finding it. So, and again, being part of the community, this community, other communities, and starting to get involved, you'll start to meet people that are doing some heavy NDI work. There's definitely people in our group that are doing heavy NDI work. So I would stay involved and get involved if you haven't been already, and you'll get to know a lot of folks here that do that. And it can be this community, it can be other communities, but the way to get into those gigs is to get to know people, and the way to get to know people is to work with them. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Comment on the unveiled DJI Focus Pro, the new version of its LiDAR focus system that works either standalone or with the RS4 Pro. And he's got an Engadget link there, too.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I looked at this. The RS4 Pro is their new gimbal that holds a little heavier camera, and that the Focus Pro interfaces with this, which is a LiDAR-based focus, and so you can use it with that dual hand control because you're getting kind of heavy, and you can see the LiDAR is off to the side there. Maybe there's a better picture of it here. And these two new focus and zoom motors that can be remoted because it now comes with their DJI a real-time transmitter. So you can have a focus assistant. There's the LiDAR off to the side there, and a pistol grip with the focus motors attached to any size cinema lens there. And you can see the also transmits, and their transmission is great. Very bulletproof to give you a clean output, or with the overlays to an assistant so he can remote focus pull over Bluetooth. So, and the whole rig, if you get the whole rig together, I think it's about $1,800, and the focus is available separately for, I think, about $719. Well, yeah, $999.
Yeah, so it's it looks
cable or transmission.
I think it's funny. So I don't quite understand the model here, but I think that is their big stream today, or is it tomorrow? For some reason, I thought that DJI's, like, their advertised stream is tomorrow. Let's see, DJI.
I wonder if this escaped the camera.
Yeah, I kept getting their emails.
But they released it. I'm so confused by their marketing. I could have sworn I saw emails that said, "Hey, we're putting out the new release or whatever on the 10th," because I thought that today's big day is Frame.io, which should come out at 9 a.m. So right after our show, we should see a Frame.io released. Emery's pretty excited about it. So I don't know what it is, but he's been tweeting about it. So we'll see what that looks like. Then DJI we thought was tomorrow, but maybe it's today. It seems like maybe they've not released everything yet. So they released some of the things that out today, and then they'll have another video tomorrow. Blackmagic's is on Friday. I don't know of any other ones on Thursday. So this is the new thing. We talked about this yesterday. Of the new way to do this is to do video releases of your products all the week before. So to let everybody know, like, hey, this is what you can come look at at the booth. It's the new modern way of telling people about what's going on.
That article was in Gadget, so maybe they had advanced.
There's been other things,
and they just released the embargo a little early. I
got an email from DJI. Maybe it was press, but it was not embargoed. It was just like my subscription email from something I bought from them at some point. So I think that they're releasing these. I think there's a new drone tomorrow, like a new FPV drone. I think is what we're waiting for. So we'll see. Next question.
Ian Alford in London up next. Great Eclipse show yesterday, everyone. What lessons can we learn to improve the show for the next one in 2044?
I don't know what we're going to do in 2044. Well, I mean, it's going to be 16K, real time. Yeah. I bet you the latency from anywhere in the United States will be less than 30 milliseconds at 8K, 120 frames per second. You'll be able to zoom in yourself. I mean, can you imagine what it's going to be like 20 years from, like what the hardware is going to be like 20 years from now? I mean, we're all going to have our own drones in space. Like, we're just going to be like, we're going to be like, we decided to look at this way up high and we just sent a drone up into it. And I don't know. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, the real important thing is going to be the AI. 4 week in advance weather prediction, whether there's going to be clouds cover or not at your exact location. They'll be able to tell you exactly whether there's going to be clouds there.
We did better than I thought we would. At first, when I saw the weather front, I was like, "Oh, it's on the entire thing." But really, it hit Texas hard. That was rough because a lot of our folks were in Texas, and we had put, I think we had the most infrastructure in Texas, but I think that everybody did in St. Louis, in North Arkansas, in Columbus or Eaton. And in New Brunswick, we got great feeds, coming out of that. So I think that worked out well. There's the hard part with any of these things is you kind of do them, especially without any budget, and you're just kind of figuring it out. Like, well, let's see what happens here. And I think that for us, understand, like, we got a lot of feeds from, we traded a lot of feeds back and forth with Time and Date and with NASA Spaceflight, and I think that we didn't use as many of them as I thought we did. We did definitely use a couple. They did learn in New Brunswick that I thought it was funny. I think I talked about it on the show. Is someone asked me in the last eclipse, they asked me to do a weather balloon, and they said we can put a camera on a weather balloon, and then we'll shoot down, and you can see the shadow. And I was like, it'll spin. Like I was like. I was like, the camera will spin. And I just kept on saying it. It'll spin. You're going to spend $250,000 for me to put something in the air, and it's going to spin, and you're not going to get anything out of it. Sure enough, they put one up there in New Brunswick, and it was spinning. And as soon as we saw it, I was like, I told them it would spin. And so I was like, go ahead, Bill.
We apologize to anybody who had Vision Pro goggles on when we got to that.
You needed a blimp, not a balloon. A blimp with the motors that can keep itself in attitude.
My opinion is that far up at 100,000 feet, you can't control. You have no idea, like the speed of it. There's no way to. I was just like, it was too high risk for me 6 years ago or whatever, 6 or 7 years ago to do it, because I was just like, I can't build something in 6 weeks that will be able to execute that effectively. Like I can't just put it in a weather balloon. I need it to be like. We would have to design it for a year or two before and test it and everything else. And I was like, I can't do that. Anyway, it was just funny because it did exactly what I told them it was going to do. Go ahead, Bill.
So it was so much fun just to be in the midst of all of that. And I have to admit, and I wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody on the back end crew and everybody else. There were things that worked, and there are a lot of things that were fun. And it was great talking to our expert down in Australia about what was going on. Key. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you ever do any kind of live thing like that where you don't know what you're going to get going into it, have somebody who can riff on that. That was great. But I just, again, wanted to thank everybody in the back-end crew for putting this together. I mean, it's amazing what we're able to do with no money, basically. And the idea that we can get people from along a giant path across the entire country to continuously pop in and contribute to a show and then put it out for the entire world to see is pretty transformative. We're in our early stages and we are making mistakes, but we're learning every time. I learned 10 or 15 different things yesterday about what I would ask for and what would work and what I need and what I don't need, plus a big agility prize to the back-end crew, because we didn't use the pipeline that we normally use in some of the areas. We had a different one for this one, and everybody pulled it together and got it on the air. So fabulous work.
Yeah, just really well done for everybody. So thank you so much for the technical crew and for everyone that was on the ground, getting their cameras up and figuring those things out. I think that one of the, a couple things that we'd probably do in the future was probably strap them as they came in. I think for us, we had a hard time knowing what we were looking at. Also, we probably needed to extend comms out a little bit more so we could ask what was going on kind of backstage. I think we'd probably send trackers to like 3 locations, so that we had like a couple, a couple like ones that are just locking on. And again, some of the stuff is we just don't know until you did it. As soon as we did it, we were like I was like, oh, it won't move that much. It moves a lot. So it's like when you're zoomed in, it's moving really fast. Like the sun is kind of like, ooh, we're going across the screen. So I was like, oh, okay. That's because when we did it with Kevin's telescope and for Nat Geo, he had a tracker, and so we just didn't think about it that much. It was full screen. It just sat there in the middle of the screen the whole time, and it wasn't a thing. And I just didn't really realize how fast it was actually moving. But overall, I think everyone did a great job, and thanks to everyone who jumped into it. And we'll talk more about that on Friday. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Brian Carney in Wheaton, Illinois. What would the experience be like if you were flying commercial while totality is happening? So another.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, if you're flying commercial, you're restricted pretty much to a certain pathway assigned by air traffic control, depending upon where you are. And unless you're flying along the path of the eclipse, it's going to make it a lot briefer. If you're flying along the path, remember it's moving, that shadow's moving about 1,500 miles an hour. So to stay in the shadow, you'd have to be flying Mach 2 or more to stay up with it. There was a Delta flight that was flying along the path, and they said they were planning on, I don't know how it came out. The pilot said he was planning on locking down the drink carts, getting them out of the aisle, and banking the aircraft so that one side can see the sun and the other side can look down at the shadow, and then banking it the other way because they have about 4 minutes or a little more than 4 minutes maybe since they're traveling along with the shadow, and then bank it the other way so that the other side of the plane can look out their windows and see the ground and the others can see the sun perhaps. So that's probably a pretty steep bank considering it was high in the sky. It has to be high in the sky pretty much to have totality.
Go ahead, Nick. Oh, can't hear you, Nick. You're muted again. Oh, can't hear you.
Always forget to unmute. I'm sorry. The thing is, the viewpoint that you have is constrained by the flight path of the plane, and the idea of banking a commercial massive passenger jet for the sake of seeing something, it goes against everything my understanding of FAA safety regulations. Like you have one job: fly the plane safely, and seeing an eclipse is not part of the job description. So I just. It's wonderful that they were able to maybe plan for something like that, but I feel like chances are I'm going to be in the aisle seat anyway, and it doesn't matter which way the plane's banked. So that's I think that if you have, I'd even honestly, I think the best view is on the ground with others. I think it's not going to be tremendously better in the air. I mean, you're going to have less horizon, and if you're in a location where the eclipse was on the horizon and it's obstructed, okay, getting higher helps you. But I don't know that the eclipse itself is going to be any more dramatic in the air than it is going to be down on the ground where you're familiar with your everyday life during the day, and suddenly what you're familiar with is gone for a few minutes. And that's what's transformative to me.
Good, Bill.
And I was surprised in my research for the show yesterday that if you're in a regular passenger jet at those speeds, you're not going to extend it that much. I mean, 4 minutes and 30 seconds, or a little less than 30 seconds was the maximum totality that anybody would experience along the path. So they were saying that might exchange it to 6 minutes or something like that, but it's not a tremendous distance unless you're in something like the SST going at supersonic speeds, in which case you will get a pretty substantial things, but those aren't flying, so nobody really has that chance. So I don't know if I'd pay for that money either to go up into the jet.
Now, if you could get another ox cart back up there.
Yeah, no, we were talking about that. Yeah, we wonder whether they did something in 1973. They had a Concorde, go parallel to the eclipse and stay in the eclipse for 75 minutes or whatever. But I was like, I wonder if somebody else was like, we could stay in the whole time if we wanted to. We've got a plane that can go actually as fast as the eclipse. But I don't. It'd be interesting to find out. Maybe it's in some. We should do a FOIA on it, Freedom of Information Act, and find out whether they used an SR-71 to view
somebody up in a Blackbird
stay in the eclipse in 1970. We didn't officially know that the SR-71 existed in 1973. And so it would be FOIA.
Besides, if
Mark,
you
I want to put
fun,
you on that. Mark's going to do a FOIA.
I'm on it.
Okay, excellent.
Well, we have fighter jets that go Mach 2, so we could be up in a fighter jet.
Mach 2 is not fast enough. It's
1,500, and Mach 2 is about
2,200. It's got to get to Mach 3. And so the fighter.
If you can find it, there's a radio chatter thing about the fastest plane in the sky. Look that up because it's the radio comms between somebody who was flying and saying, "We're going this fast," and somebody going, "Well, I got a faster plane. We're going this fast." And finally, the Blackbird or something
doing a speed check.
It's just great.
The big thing about the SR-71 is that it could do that sustained. Right, so a fighter jet can do Mach 2 with afterburners for a short amount of time, and then it's got to slow down.
SR-71 just keeps going.
It just its cruising speed is like
the coolest.
Yeah, it's still classified.
Yes, no one said exactly how. The published speed is still pretty fast. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, up next. In addition to updating its developer guidelines to allow music streaming apps to link to external websites, Apple has also added new language that allows game emulators on the app stores. Comment?
Sure. Thanks. Like, I don't care. I mean, like I don't. I mean, like it's so you can take arcade games and older games or whatever and play them. Sure. Like, I mean, there was some pressure and some geeks were really upset about that, but I don't get it. Like, the games are pretty old. Like, I got an Atari thinking I'd play a lot more Space Invaders and things like I did in the 2600. I got one of those ones, like a little box, and does a thing, and I never use it. Like, it sits there. I played it. It was great for a couple hours, and we were really going back to it. I didn't know that my wife was really good at Space Invaders. Like, no one had told me that she had spent hours and hours and hours playing as a child. And way better than me. And I just wanted to say she smoked me. Like I was like, where did she learn this? And so that's the only thing. And then I was like, okay, I don't want to play anymore. Anyways, good, Courtney.
Yeah, I imagine it's only if the app does not allow in-app purchases, because then they're going to want to take their 30% of.
Well, they'll still let you do it.
Purchasing. Yeah, they'll just take 30% of anything, any of those games you buy to purchase to run.
I think most of the emulators don't charge anything, because technically what they're doing is illegal.
They're stealing the wrong code anyway.
So I think that's why Apple didn't let them do it in the first place. And I think Apple's looking at low-hanging fruit that the EU and the DOJ wants to. That was listed as one of the idiotic things that the DOJ thinks is important. Like, you can't do emulators. Like, okay, so Apple's like, okay, fine. Here's your stupid emulator. Like, I think that's what the conversation was internally, was here's your stupid emulator. Like we're going to check off all these things that don't really affect us, so that make you actually fight. Because the DOJ created one of the dumbest laundry lists I've ever seen about little complaints. It's like the most nerdy, unconnected to reality list that I've ever seen. And they don't do this and they don't do that. And I think Apple's just going to check all the goofy stuff off, and then let them fight on the stuff that they can't win on, which they can't. Next question.
Ian Alford in London is up next again. In this case, 3 days, 1 hour, 38 minutes to the Blackmagic NAB update. What's on your wish list for the announcement?
Nick?
Yeah, and I'll say that I love Blackmagic equipment, but my personal pet peeve is that you can't have an external time code feed used on the ATEM mini line. And I know the ATEM mini line is its own thing, but I feed everything in this studio is locked in with time code and Genlock, and I'm not worried about Genlock as much on a mini, but I would just love to be able to feed it time code over SDI, and I feel like it's able to set time of day over Ethernet from the computer that's running the ATEM control software. So you can get an external time value in there. I just wish it could be over SDI so I could feed it off of our constellation. So that's, the question is the wish list, and that tiny little thing. I would really like that.
We can imagine. Go ahead, Mark.
So better audio on the mini lineup, and then on the ISO lineup of the minis, to be able to record to something that's like raw or uncompressed, just so you have a better editing experience afterwards.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I wish that whatever they announce, it's available on the first day of NAB to buy. Yeah, which usually is available a year later.
I just want to say they used to do that, and they built a reputation. They occasionally do it now, but I would say that you're 100% right. 10 years ago, Blackmagic would release something, and you knew that anything they released that year was available March of the next year. Like, it was guaranteed. Like, it wasn't. You're not going to see that for a year. Now, they usually, within a couple weeks, I think it's generally 2 weeks out, they release everything. It's not 100% that way, but they usually hold back the releases until they can know that they can actually deliver, at least start delivering some. They may not have a ton of them, but they'll have like 100 out there, and then they put them out. So if you order them the first minute, you're going to get one, and then after that, the factory starts up. But they've actually made some, and the factory's ready to go. So that's changed a lot. I would say that for me, full frame sensor PTZ with autofocus and global shutter. that would do it. so anyway, so that I think that that would be that's what basically, except for the rolling shutter, that's what the FR7s, which we were using at the booth, the Sony FR7s, and Sony lent those to us for the booth. But that's what I use in a bunch of the other shows that I work on are FX6s and FR7s, and because the FR7s are full frame sensor, and it's kind of an amazing experience. And so I would love to see Blackmagic do that. I would really love to see a box camera. I think that they keep on going down this path of form factors on their cameras. Like, I don't want you to put a screen on the camera. Like, it just means it's just one more thing that I have to deal with as a filmmaker. I don't want screens attached to the camera. I need you to I want to put my own screen in there. I want to put it where I want to put it. I don't want it to be a flap that comes out, because that becomes a whole problem in our rigs. Is like, where does that flap go? And then we just end up ignoring it because the 6K, the screen on the back is a constant challenge for us. And so, because you're worried about breaking it. And so really what we want is like a Komodo little box, that does what it does. And then we build kits around it. I think that it's going to be hard for Blackmagic to be taken seriously as a film camera until they have a box, that does it's like a little processor that does imaging. Like that's what Arri does. That's what Sony does. That's what Red does. That's what, and so I guess Canon doesn't really do that, but they should. So I mean, there's a reason that those boxes are really successful, because we're building big rigs, that are complex around them, and so I think that is, so we'll see what happens there. It's hard to imagine for me, like I would love to see more super sources in the constellations, like a constellation, I feel like Apple, I feel like Blackmagic has pulled back a little bit from, going bigger on the constellations, but also 3D transforms in their switchers would be amazing. It would take an extra processor to do that. Right now, you can't do any like kind of corner pinning, anything that would be like a rotate in 3D, which I had on a Panasonic switcher, 20 years ago. So that, any kind of 3D transform doesn't exist right now. So it'd be interesting to see that. It'll also be interesting to see what their IP transmission is. Like, what are they going to do there? We haven't seen that yet. So anyway, so those are some of the things that I'm thinking about, but I know that they'll come out with, usually it's a pretty good Fridays. The Blackmagic release day is usually a good day to check things out. They usually, Grant thinks of things that we don't, so I'm sure there'll be another 180 features released for Resolve. Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in San Jose, California. This is a very cool, using sodium vapor lamps for keying. Have you seen this? And is it the best keying solution ever from 50 years ago? And he's got a YouTube link.
Go ahead, Nick. Is this from Mary Poppins? Is this the Mary
Poppins?
It
is. Yeah. So I watched, I skimmed through the video without audio after seeing the question in the list. And I think they actually also have Paul Debevec in this video, working with them. So again, they didn't subtitle it, or I didn't see the subtitles, and I didn't see a lower third. So, but that looks like Paul Debevec talking with them on the, and like Paul, like Dr. Debevec knows, everything. He was doing it. He got his PhD in digital imaging technologies back when I was just trying to figure out how to break into the feature film industry. The big deal is that it requires a lot of specialized equipment. So that all that equipment was owned by Disney. So Disney was the only company. If I remember correctly, there might have been 2 cameras in the world capable of filming with that technology, and they were owned by Disney, and that was the end of it. So this actually it predates the use of green screen and blue screen. We really hadn't figured those out yet, and those were film processes. So it was in the film emulsion that we worked out how to do high contrast, essentially black and white mattes using blue as the color to key on. The sodium vapor takes advantage of something that our eyes, it's a trait of our vision, and it's a trait of chemistry. The sodium vapor, and if you skim through the video, you'll see, I think they describe it here, its light illuminates at a very specific wavelength, and only that wavelength. So you can create a filter that either filters out that wavelength or allows it to pass through. And all of the other lights that we use, like tungsten and everything that you would put gels over, just happens to not really overlap that particular wavelength very much. And when we see white light, we're not seeing actual always full white light, even noise lighting across all values of all possible spectrums here. We're usually seeing a spike somewhere in the greens, a spike somewhere in the reds, and a spike somewhere in the blues. And each of those spikes can be independent of the wavelength of the sodium vapor lighting. And so as a result, the actual light lighting the talent is not overlapping with the actual wavelength of the tungsten lamp. So I don't know if in the video they were actually using sodium vapor or if they were simulating it by just using gels. I'm guessing they were simulating it because I'd be really impressed if they got their hands on sodium vapor lighting and the appropriate filters and prisms for this.
I was going to say the prism is the complicated part because the image would come in and get split, and one was going to it was basically splitting out another channel that was just black and white to that area. So you'd have that, and I think that would be hard to reproduce.
Right.
Without an incredible amount of investment.
And it necessitates multiple cameras, and that's the other thing is that what's happening is they're capturing every frame on two packs of film. Yeah,
two packs of film, but it's one camera. Like it's coming in.
It's one housing, but essentially I'm considering each
they used a modified
film pack is a camera. So if we were to do that digitally today, you would have to have two sensors.
Yeah.
For one
which
for
we
each
talked about
in
the 90s. We used to talk about we should do sodium vapor. We should do that. But we should have a sensor that does that. It would be easy because we were like it's black and white. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you're right. I think Disney used a modified 3-strip Technicolor camera, and they used two. One strip ran a black and white with a filter that only let the narrow wavelength of the sodium vapor reach that emulsion, and the other was a color negative running through instead of YCM separation that the Technicolor used to use. But this video is on the use of a digital camera, and you can see here when they put a spectrometer out there that the sodium vapor, if they are using sodium vapor to light the background, it's a separate, fairly narrow wavelength, and it's separated from the other colors pretty far. So maybe it's easier to just pull a standard matte off of a single digital image, since that narrow band, it's like a better pure green screen, only it's shifted up into the
and I think
higher frequency.
Fundamentally, the technology got good enough that they didn't feel like they needed to build a whole new piece of hardware. But I remember being in ILM, we talked about the sodium vapor all the time. Like it'd be great if we had a camera that would just do that. Like just have another sensor that just had a black and white on that was just taking that file and just putting it out. It was just good.
You could take an older 3-chip camera, CCD camera, and put a special sodium vapor filter in one of the prism sides and capture
in theory,
full color on the other sides.
You could manufacture a chip, where the Bayer pattern had a fourth filter instead of just RGB. That there's a fourth filter, and you're using that for matte. And it was
when we talked about it was all CCDs. So we already have 3 chips that you could do if you switch the CCD out for a chip. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the only other thing I was going to add is that if you liked this video about the sodium vapor process, there is also a lecture by John Knoll. I think it's on Vimeo, not YouTube, but if you Google like John Knoll compositing, film compositing, he did a lecture at ILM that's been recorded and put out and available publicly on Vimeo that really discusses the assembly and the practice and the theory of how compositing was done at ILM before digital. And it's absolutely fascinating. I love it.
Good, Bill.
I was going to add that an argon laser at green, using a green argon laser to illuminate the back screen might be a better way to have a very narrow green. Right. Might make it a little easier to pull a key.
Yeah, go, Bill.
So I was just talking, it triggers me terribly when I hear of sodium vapor because I've been in so many corporate shoots where for some reason they cheaped out on their lights and they had sodium vapor over a store warehouse or something like that. And it was just awful because the notch in the spectrum is so horrible. You bring that back and you try to color correct it and you just have no joy at all. So for me, even though I used to have green lights for my washes in the studio when we were doing green screen and had to substitute the tubes, I stopped doing that. I would always prefer to have full spectrum lights that I could filter out to get a color I wanted, rather than something that was so badly notched that there's nothing you can do to recover that part of the spectrum in post when you need to. Just seemed like a waste of money to me, but that's me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you do mass production of it, we got pretty touchy. Like you have to know what you're doing. It's with great, you're definitely running with knives when you use green on green, and so you do have to know what you're doing. It is really a tricky thing, but it definitely cuts your labor costs by 10x.
And I was just going to add that the warehouse lighting that uses sodium vapor is very different than the sodium vapor lights that were used for the keying process. The warehouse lighting is also not tuned to oscillate in sync with your camera. So you're going to get all kinds of artifacts from the mistiming between the strobing of those lights versus your camera.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Chuck Hodges in Tolume, California. And I'm pronouncing that wrong, I suspect, and I apologize to you all. My questions seem misunderstood. I don't need to know how booths work around the world or why we want a booth. I just need an answer to the question written. How much will this specific NAB booth cost as built? We can figure out comparisons after. Thanks.
I don't know yet. We're still working on it. So we'll know that. Ask that question next Friday, a week from Friday, when we're talking about how we did it. If I was going to throw a dart at what it took to do all the execution and everything that was supported and everything else, I'd say about $35,000 to $40,000. I think that's about, if you're talking about as built, that's probably the ballpark. But I don't know yet until the dust settles. This is how this works. I mean, I'd love to say it. We've never done it before. Every time we look around, there's another cost that we're solving. So good, Mark.
Guy has in the chat that the NAB booths that are 10 to 20 feet range in price depending on where they are, from $16,000 to $50,000.
Yeah. So and then you have bandwidth on top of that, and then we have a power itself. Just the power was like $1,200 or $1,500, something like that. So anyway, so it adds up. Next question.
Next one comes from Ketchefil Gersvold in Tromsø, Norway. Currently working on a VP demo with Unreal Engine plus Zoom plus green screen talents. What methods for input to trigger actions in the scene would you recommend? Currently just testing with keyboard inputs.
If only Nick was here. Oh, wait, he is here. Go ahead, Nick.
So one of the things that's native to Unreal Engine is something called web remote control. So built into Unreal Engine is a web server so that you can actually expose buttons, controls, sliders, color adjustments on a web page that you can then operate with any device that has a web browser that's on the same network as the Unreal Engine machine. So that's my first suggestion, because it's all built in. And if you have any other device on that network, it could be a laptop, an iPad, a phone, you can operate what's happening in the Unreal Engine scene through web remote control. And one other note is that Unreal Engine does have remote control availability over OSC. So you could use a Stream Deck plugin that communicates over OSC and program your OSC commands into that. And so that would give you extensibility through Stream Deck's interface to be able to custom program individual keys to do things. But honestly, I feel like the web remote control gives you a lot more capabilities than just the Stream Deck.
Next question.
And the last one before the top of the hour. Has anyone ever used TVU devices? How do they compare to LiveU?
I have used TVU devices. Now, LiveU is lending one to us that we're going to be using for NAB, and I asked LiveU to lend that to us because I used to lease 2 LiveUs, and I leased them for almost a decade. And before I had the LiveUs, I had DeGeros and TVUs. So hopefully that answers your question. So I had those for about 6 months each, and they weren't as successful. So I think that TVU has not been as successful for us as some of the other options there. We're jumping in Greg Downing. I'm really excited that Greg Downing's going to be here next, right after the top of the hour here. He's an old friend of mine, and he is it's going to be really exciting to have him on here just in a couple seconds here. Just a quick reminder that tomorrow we're going to be shifting gears and talking about conference room acoustic design. So we're going from photogrammetry today to conference rooms tomorrow. FX Factory will be here on Thursday, and they're going to be talking about their plugins and how they approach that development process. We'll be talking about how we did the eclipse, how we actually covered the eclipse on Monday, on Friday. And then, of course, Saturday and Sunday are the days of introspection, and you'll probably get some live shots of the booth, or as we're slowly setting up the booth there. So stay tuned for that. A reminder that we will, even though we're doing all of those things, we will still have a panelist meeting. So if you're a panelist, we're going to have the panelist meeting on Saturday, same time, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So stay tuned for that. So if you're interested in that, we'd love to have you join our panel. So come check it out. Welcome back for the second hour, and I'm so excited to have Greg Downing here. So hi, hey Greg, can you hear us? Okay.
I sure can.
Outstanding. Greg and I think we met, it probably was a solid 22, 23 years ago. You were working with RealViz on Image Modeler, right?
That's right. That's right. In fact, I think I met you before I even moved to France to work on that. So that was definitely like probably around year 2000, something like that.
A long time ago, and Greg built some training with DV Garage a long time ago, and every time I see Greg at a conference, I always go up and go, "What are you working on right now?" Because I always know it's going to be cool. I always know that there's like what is he doing now? And so I'm always excited to see what you're working on. And can you tell us a little bit about how did you get into photogrammetry?
Yeah, it was a long and circuitous path that I followed to get to where I am. I studied theater and political science in college, and when I got out, I decided that political science was the only jobs were working for the bad guys, and I decided I was not really that good of an actor after all those years of study. And I ended up getting a job at Apple because I had made a web page in college, and they came out with the QuickTime VR authoring studio, which was the first software that let you stitch together images into panoramas. And I fell in love with it. And I just arranged my whole life around doing that. And I tried to get work.
Were you using the old Kaiden rig?
Yep. I used Kaiden rig for many years. My first one was just a bent piece of aluminum because there were no rigs built for doing it at the time. So
and for those listening, the Kaiden rig that I mentioned, the process of doing this was quite a thing. I was into it early as well, probably 94 or so. And you have this rig, and it had to hang the camera over the nodal point of the lens so that you wouldn't have any parallax. And so you'd figure out where that was, and then it had this little bar, and it would rotate around that in different directions. Now you would take this in film. Remember, this is in the 90s. We didn't have digital, and then we had this little I don't know what you used, but we had a little Nikon scanner that we put them into and make sure that they're in the right order. And then you'd scan them all in, and then you would take them into. It was the what was the scripting? There was a scripting.
There's something that Apple had that was like pre-authoring studio. That was,
and we'd write this script, and we would go, and then you'd end up with a QuickTime VR. And it wasn't really stitching anything, right? It was
It's kind of merging them. Yeah, it was merging them. It was putting it into a cylindrical format from rectilinear, like kind of a flat image into a surround image. But it was cool. I mean, it felt like magic at the time. It did. I'd built my own darkroom and all that stuff. So at the time, it was doing this seemed like just absolute magic. And I just fell in love with that process and all the creative things you could do once you started. They kind of created a multimedia platform too. So I started with panoramic photography. I couldn't find work doing it for a while. So I worked at Apple for a long time doing tech support internally, but that let me talk to all the people who were working in the QuickTime group on the phone. So while I was resetting their passwords, I could quiz them on all the problems I have. And sometimes it would take a little longer, to reset their password. Until my question was answered.
I can fix your password, but you're going to have. But I have a couple questions for you to answer first.
That's right. It's kind of an exchange.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then, after several years of trying to get work doing this and not getting anywhere, I mean, even doing things I didn't want to do. Like I didn't want to do real estate, but I was still trying to get work doing it. I couldn't even get a job doing that. And after 3 years of that, I'm like, well, if no one's going to pay me to do this, I'm just going to go and do what I want to do most with this.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to do was go to Europe and photograph ruins. So I'm like, I'm just going to do that. I saved up 3 months of vacation. Like I took all that vacation time, went to Europe, started doing it. I was traveling around, staying in youth hostels, and this group of kids comes through, and they're all filming the interior of these hostels. I'm like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "We're filming the interior of every youth hostel in Europe." I'm like, "You think people are going to watch that? Like, how are they going to scrub through all that video?"
Right.
And then I showed them what they're doing, and the girl pulled out a cell phone, made a call, just shoved the phone in my face, and I was like, I don't know why I'm talking to you, but this person just gave me this phone. He says, "You have a website?" 10 minutes later, he's like, "How would you like to go to Notre Dame and to the Louvre and just keep doing what you're doing, only we're going to pay you to do it?" And that was my first gig. And as soon as that happened, then I kind of that's where my career started.
It's so great. It's
that moment.
I love a lot of times when we bring people on, I always want that origin story, because it is oftentimes I'm just going to go do what I'm going to do what I'm up to, and then wait for the world to come to it. And something will happen. Like there's a certain level of just something will happen if I start shaking the jar.
That's right. No, it was a good life lesson in following your heart. Following your heart, doing the most interesting thing that you can think of doing. And it worked out. It worked out for me. Maybe it would be different if I wanted to be a basketball player or something like that. But there's some things that I probably would not have done very well at. But this worked out. So from there, it kind of went naturally. I did several travel photography gigs, and then I basically was having a series of problems, and every problem was being solved by the SIGGRAPH conference, which is the big annual graphics conference that's been going on for 50 plus years. And so all the papers always said SIGGRAPH on it. So I was like, well, I should go to this SIGGRAPH thing, figure out what that is. Because when you're doing surround photography, you can't crop out parts of the image and adjust the exposure so that everything fits within the dynamic range of your framing. You have to be able to expose everything properly. So my big problem was blown out windows. Well, that was solved by HDR, which was being presented at SIGGRAPH. And then so I went to this look at SIGGRAPH stuff. I saw all that. And then I saw Paul Debevic's 1986 paper on photogrammetry. Right. And I think I didn't have that intelligent of a view of computer graphics at the time. I didn't fully understand everything I was looking at, because my opinion at the time was computer graphics could make things that looked like plastic, because the best thing I had seen was Toy Story and everything was made out of plastic. So it's like, I don't want to make things that look like plastic. I want to make real things. So it's like, 3D is not good for that. But when I saw photogrammetry, it opened up the whole world to me. I was like, oh, we can make reality with this. We can make.
I remember Paul releasing there was a shot in Berkeley of that tower.
Yeah,
going around the tower, and all of us were just stunned. It was an entirely different world. All at one time.
Yeah. And for me, I was like, I can leverage my photography skills. Like, this is probably something I can do. So I started trying to do that. There was a tool called Canoma at the time, which was kind of like a very premature photogrammetry tool. But it was cool to have something that I could use. So then I started shooting panoramas and then using photogrammetry to jump from panorama to panorama and move between them. So that was really exciting to learn that. So when I went to SIGGRAPH, I met the guys from RealViz, and I started showing them these panoramas integrated with photogrammetry. And they're like, we're trying to build a tool that lets people do this. Would you like to come work with us? So I worked for a couple of months in San Francisco where we met, and then I took off to France and lived there for a while.
It's so amazing that you were only there for a couple months, like that we just happened to run across each other at the right time. Because you were, you know, like I think we were just getting started up, and I was into photogrammetry and didn't know where to, you know, I think I had run into RealVisit SIGGRAPH or something like that, and then I remember coming over to the office, and you showed me this, and I was like, oh, this is way easier than what I've been doing.
And by today's standard, that'd be like an incredible amount of work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, when you're trying to explain how photogrammetry works, how does it, we've talked about it here in the past, but from your perspective, what are the key things about how photogrammetry is generated? Well,
my short answer is you're creating 3D from photos, and the way that I think about it when introducing it to someone who's kind of new to the subject is that you're taking a whole lot of photos of something from all kinds of different angles. And then you're figuring out where all of those cameras were in space. So you know where they are, so translation, and then you figure out their rotation, which way each camera is pointing. You figure all that out at once. So you figure that out for all your cameras. Once you do that, you can trace pixels through the cameras. If you mark the same point, they appear at the same point in space. And so you can mark a point, or you can automatically generate a bunch of points. And then you start connecting all those points, and that gives you a mesh model, a 3D model, once you connect all those points. And then you turn all those cameras into projectors, and they're projecting the texture onto that modeled surface. Yeah. So that's kind of like there's lots of different levels you could go down to in explaining it, but that's kind of the simple form.
And I have some videos that you sent us this morning. Is there anything you want to show people as far as what you've been working on?
Yeah, sure. Let's see.
Just call one out and I'll find it.
Yeah, let's take a look at the one that says no spectators. That's a decent one.
Start with this one, and
I don't know how much the names came through in the downloads.
I see it. I got it. Let's see here. So this is there, and
so this was a piece that Intel funded. It was with the Smithsonian Renwick Museum. These are all photogrammetry models. This is something that we did for the Sansar platform. So this was a really cool installation that the Smithsonian Renwick Museum did of Burning Man art. So we went there and we scanned all of the exhibits. And I did this work with Kevin Kane, who's been a collaborator for many years. But we scanned all of these and then brought them into Sansar's game engine. And you're able to walk around inside the space in virtual reality. So you can.
So we're seeing a video, but the video is really something that you could walk around a virtual museum, and these are things that you captured at Burning Man.
No. This is all art from Burning Man.
Oh, got it. Okay.
That was brought into the Renwick Museum as art. So they did an exhibit on Burning Man art, and so we scanned it in the museum. Actually, the museum itself in this piece, due to some of the restrictions of the Sansar engine, it can only, they were budgeting their polygons very carefully. So the museum was recreated and is fully CG. All the artwork is scanned.
Right, because they wanted to put the detail in the artwork and not in the. So this was lower polys on the back end to make sure, but it still looks. Still looks great.
And this was just an incredible exhibit, and to get to scan this art was a lot of fun. And the cool thing about the way it was,
did you use, or how did you take pictures of it to get the detail?
Yeah, this was thousands and thousands of still photographs. Yeah. There were a few pieces that were, that structured light was used for, where there was a little too much filigree, like you have a little.
For our viewers, can you define structured light versus unstructured light?
Yeah, sure. So structured light is where you're projecting a known pattern onto the surface geometry, and then you've got a camera. You've got a projector and a camera next to each other, and it's a known physical geometry between those, so you know exactly where they are relative to one another. The projector is projecting. It might be just like lines or blocks and patterns, and the camera is capturing it, and it's triangulating the positioning using that, so you can come up with great geometry that way, and you can also light it with a projection as well.
Right. Absolutely. That's great.
It works better for I started with photogrammetry, and photogrammetry is still part of every single project, and usually I'm integrating it with other types of scans.
Yeah.
But there are specific cases where you want to use other types of scanners. Photogrammetry works really well when there's lots of detail on the surface to grab onto, where it can really just bite into it. If you got something like a brick pattern or stone or things like that, where it's all unique. Every surface is unique. It's not a repetitive pattern, and there's a lot of detail and contrast to grab onto. The cases where you don't have that would be like a lot of man-made interiors, like white walls. Like if you've got nothing but white walls, photogrammetry fails on that pretty poorly. And then what you want is something that actually projects something onto the surface that you're then recording, or something that you're hitting the surface with and getting a return on, like laser scanning.
Yep. And when you do that, are you using handheld LiDAR, handheld scanners, or are you using LiDAR, or a little bit of both, or all of the above? All of
them. It really depends on the project, what type of scanner you're using. And I just did a project about 2 weeks ago in Yosemite. I've been working with a geologist there for something like 16 or 17 years. I've done projects with him, and he studies rockfall in Yosemite because it kills more people than almost anything else in the park. Waterfall, more people go off waterfalls by accident, but it kills a lot of people. So they have a dedicated geologist there studying the rockfall to kind of get an idea of where the most active areas are. And for the first time in history, they discovered a crack just appeared in the rock. And strangely, in the history of geology, this is not something that has occurred in a recorded way before. And so there's this big rock, and it's going to release a slab of granite that is absolutely huge. It's 10 feet by 30 feet by 220 feet.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It is a big slab of granite that's going to drop 500 feet down onto the valley floor. So there's a lot of concern about.
So getting a sense of when it's going to happen would be useful.
That would be nice. And there are a lot of betting pools on that right now about when it's going to happen. And the thing is, the crack's been growing every day. So we wanted to scan that. We were like, okay, we want some ground truth of, like, they've got little sensors inside the crack where it's got a little string that it's plucking, and it's using the pitch to figure out how much it's spread.
Yeah.
So they know every 10 minutes how much it changes. And but they wanted but that only gives them 1 or 2 points along the crack. So I went up there. I went on rappel and rappelled down this rock that's going to,
as you do,
Yeah. And for that, I used I think the BLK to go, which is kind of like a handheld one that you can wave. It doesn't require. It's something you could do while you're rappelling and not dying. You're concentrating on not dying, but you also kind of want to scan as you're not dying. So that's so in that case, the choice is made purely based on I've got one hand that I can use.
Right.
The other hand I'm holding on for. In other cases, like you've got the luxury of having a little bit more time or having the ability to set up a tripod. So you might use a scanner that's a higher quality scanner. In other cases, you really need that projection where you can get into nooks and crannies of using a structured light scanner, something like I've used the Artec Leo a lot of times for a lot of projects, for kind of getting those details. Or you've got plastics or something that's got a little bit of a shine, so you want something that's maybe using blue light that does a little better with the reflective surfaces. So it kind of all depends on which problem related to scanning that you're trying to solve. And then you also put a layer of photos on top because, you can do so much better with a DSLR than what's built into these devices.
Yeah, I remember we were talking years ago, and I was excited about scanning because I had this little scanner in my office that I was using for things, and Greg was like, "Yeah, it's pretty good." Eventually, because this was like 2005 or 2006, the resolution of cameras was still pretty low, and so I was like not thinking about cameras as like that's going to be higher resolution, and Greg was like, eventually the cameras will outstrip the scanners as far as the resolution goes, because you'll be just limited by the resolution of the camera and how close you are, and you can just take a lot more photos and get more detail. And I think about that all the time.
No, I mean,
a little side conversation with Greg, but it was like 10 minutes long, I'm sure, like walking through the office. And I think about it when I think about like where we are now, because I've taken some, I've done some stuff in Angkor Wat, and me just fiddling around created a 300 million poly model, and that wasn't even complete. That was just like a test, just from photos, and not even a new camera. Like that was like a older,
right? And you wouldn't even have to do that many photos to reach that. It's easy to get up into the billions of polys, for your first pass. And so, I think that statement's still true, and I think that companies like Canon and Nikon and Sony are moving so much. They have such a large market that they can move their technology.
What do you think have you used the Sonys with the 61 megapixel camera? Has that worked well at all? Have you tested
those?
No,
that's my go-to. So I use the A7R series of cameras.
What are your if someone's getting into photogrammetry, what would be your tips? Like if I'm going to send you out on your way to start shooting, what would you say? And they're just going to do pure photogrammetry. They're not going to do any structured light. They're just going to go out and want to get started and maybe throw it into Metashape or throw it into something else. What would you tell them? What are the tips as you go out? These are the things you remember to do or not do when you go out and shoot.
Yeah. You want a lot of photos. You want to be moving around your subject. So if you're doing an object, you're orbiting around the object. You're getting as many different heights as possible, as well as going around it. If you're doing something like a room interior or an interior space, you're acting as if there's something in the middle of the room, and you're photographing this invisible object, kind of the same way. Photogrammetry does not like panning. It doesn't like for you to be in the same spot panning around. It likes parallax. It likes movement, translating the camera in some way between the photos. So make sure you do that. Other than that, lock your exposure. Just do one exposure for everything. You want to make sure everything's really sharp. That's really important. So make sure that your shutter speed is fast enough that you have no blurry frames due to shutter speed. You want to make sure your aperture is small enough that you have maximum depth.
Do you have a target aperture when you're shooting?
It depends on how close you're getting to your subject and what your focal length is. So that will vary. If you're doing something like a room, you probably don't want to open up much more than f8 or f5, something like that. If you're getting really close to your subject matter, you want a smaller aperture, which is a larger number. You want to minimize the noise as well. So, it's the tripod of photography of going back and forth between your aperture, your shutter speed, and your sensitivity, or your ISO.
Right.
You kind of want the best of each, but the most important thing is that you have sharp photographs. You can't do anything with a blurry photograph.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have anything else you want to show before we jump into some of the questions?
Sure. Let's see. There's I think I sent you a bunch of stuff.
Why don't I start at the top, and I'll just show a couple of them. We'll just go through them kind of like a thing, and you can just mention a couple things, and then we'll do it. So here is this is. Let's see here. We'll just do them kind of one at a time. You can talk about them, and we'll just do it kind of a
let's do that
rapid fire. So here's this is.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Obviously, yesterday was the eclipse. So this was a piece I did on the eclipse. And this one's interesting because of its kind of hybrid combination of different technologies. So I've got a stereoscopic spherical video as a background plate here. And then I did photogrammetry of the rock that you're standing on in the foreground.
Right.
And so I integrated those two together in Unity. So you have the photogrammetry rock, which is also in this spherical video. So then I put a color sampler on the rock in the video, and I use that to drive in real time. I change the color of the photogrammetry rock so it always matches the video. So I have video components, spherical video components, and the real-time photogrammetry components well integrated because they're being driven by one another. This was the 2017 eclipse shot from the Grand Tetons. And I was managing 3 different cameras during the eclipse, the spherical camera. I was also doing a telephoto image with a mechanical tracker tracking the sun and the sun protection filters so I could get my close-up of the eclipse. And I put that inside of a 3D model of a telescope. So you appear on this cliff right before the eclipse. You start to see the light change, and then you can look into the telescope, and you can see the eclipse close up.
Yeah,
and you get to experience the full sunset, and the things like the bats coming out, all the sounds changing. I did some ambient sonic sound. So this is something I did for Intel's i9 launch when they did that. So it was just kind of a technology demo of some of the cool things you could do.
Here's another one here.
Oh yeah, so this was a documentary that I was part of in Egypt, and we were trying to measure how they moved obelisks around. And loaded them onto boats and moved them to all different parts of Egypt. And this was on Nat Geo and French Channel 3. And along the way, we found this stela. So this is basically a large face that had a hieroglyphic manual of how you move a 1,000-ton obelisk. And on the right side, they had basically like an IKEA manual of how you move, how you would drag it around. So it was an incredible find, completely historic. And so I was able to get in there and photograph it. And if you want to play it again, I can describe what I was trying to do was trying to get a gigapixel detailed texture for that surface. So you can see here that I'm showing the camera position on the left in the middle of the photo I was taken, and then how that aligns onto the 3D model on the right. So by combining all of these close-up photographs together, I was able to realize a gigapixel resolution flat image that could be used to study the hieroglyphics later.
And what's funny about that is that you actually you get to a point with the gigapixel that it's a higher resolution than what you see when you're there. So you can zoom in on it and examine it, a little bit later. Here's another one here. Let's
and you have the 3D model for that as well. So you can also tilt it, or you can use a light, which is what an archaeologist. I was working. We were working with Philippe Martinez, who's this Egyptologist, and he's been working there for decades. And, he'd go down there with a flashlight, move the flashlight around to kind of, because these are old and worn text. So he's trying to figure out the exact shape. And so you can do that in 3D in post as well. And it's much more comfortable to do it that way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. A lot less crouching down.
Yes.
Here's another one here.
So I've got this device called a Gigamacro, and it kind of looks like a 3D printed, like a 3D printer, but you put a camera on it instead. So it allows you to stack up and down to do focus stacking. So when you do a macro, your depth of field is thinner than a sheet of paper. So you're not getting much of the image sharp at the same time. So if you stack, you do like maybe 80 images going through an object like a butterfly, you can get everything in focus at the same time. Then it moves left, right, forward, and back. And then I stitch those together. So I focus stack, I take each stack, compress it down, pull out the sharpest part of every image, make a single image of it, and then I'll stack hundreds of those left and right and it up and down, and it's a completely automated process. So you can do gigapixel of tiny objects. And you can, they've got a website, gigamacro.com, if you're wondering what this device looks like. And so I can take that, put that on a 3D model, and then bring that into VR and use that for, this is something like, like a natural history museum might want to do, or science museum. You can then go through and expand and explore these images. The name of my company is Hyper Acuity, and what that means is someone who has better than 20/20 vision, or better than normal hearing, or their senses are better. And that's kind of the philosophy that's driven me in my captures, and that I'm trying to capture more than you can see if you're there.
Yeah.
More spectra, more dynamic range, more resolution, kind of on every axis. I try to make it an experience that's even more than you could experience there. And then I build special tools that allow you to kind of navigate and explore all this detail.
Yeah, and we've done macro with my hand, and it's painful. Like, so I'm super painful. Here's another one here. This is from Intel.
Okay, this is another museum piece, and we can scrub through pieces of this. Mm-hmm. But this is another one with the Smithsonian, another museum of the Smithsonian, which this was the American Art Museum. And for this, we went in, we scanned the interior of the museum, and added volumetric people. And for each art piece, you would stand in front of the art piece, and there would be a way that we would kind of show you some parallel world that gave context to the art. So that's why it was called Beyond the Frame. So we used a number of different technologies for this. And I think there's another video there that shows a little more detail of what the museum looks like. Now, for this one, because we were using Unity, we were, and I'm mostly using Unreal these days, but at the time, Unity was the primary tool. So we were able to pull in the full scan of the entire museum, so the artwork in the context of the museum. And then we scanned additional locations to show something interesting about the artwork. So one of them was that statue. So I took that statue, and there were, from the mold that statue was made from, 100 years ago, there was multiple statues made from it. So I was able to align these, which they've never been physically aligned together. And you can see differences between the statues. So one that's been sitting in a graveyard for 100 years, and another one that's been sitting in a museum for 100 years, being able to see the difference between those. And also just the differences between the wax that went in the mold, all the mold release. And you can see all of these fine details as you switch back and forth between the different models. So a lot of stuff like that was really fun.
I think virtual museums is going to be a big deal. We did some virtual museums where we did some photogrammetry with some Shona artwork from Zimbabwe and put them on, but made them, instead of being this big, we made them massive. And you could walk around them, and it would show you things. And we built like a 30 by 30. This is, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, but we had all mocap, inside out mocap, and so it was. But as soon as we did it, nowadays you don't need it. You could do, it was outside in. We could do inside out now with most of the headsets. You can just wander around. The biggest problem, I feel like there's a future where we are going to start having a room in our house that's like the VR room, like it's like 15 by 15 by 10, and you can just walk around in it because we need an open space.
Some of the redirected walking techniques are interesting and can maybe expand that. So the redirected walking is where every time you take a step and your body gets a little jarred when you take a step, you can cheat it by twisting the world just a little bit and make people walk in figure eights and they think they're walking in a straight line. So there's some techniques like that can be used to kind of make us feel, but
But I will say a big volume is amazing.
Big volume is best because
if only there were some big open spaces in these cities right now, we could just fill them up with a way to wander around. So
and things like teleporting feels magical, where you press a button and it creates a little arc and you jump to wherever it was, you place the arc, and that's pretty magical the first time you use it. But for me, I feel like it reduces the overall impact of being in the space. When you're actually walking, you're pulling in so much more detail about the space, and it creates a larger impact. And I've seen this over and over again when I've demoed this. If I have a really large space to demo and people can actually walk freely, it's so different than just like pushing the teleport button over and over again.
We're going to jump into some of the questions from the panelists, and then we'll go to everyone else there. And if we have time, we'll come back to some more images. Go ahead, Nick.
Sure. Thanks so much for joining us. And I have to say that in terms of legacy, by the way, there's a thread of you introducing Alex to photogrammetry and ultimately RealViz. Alex introduced me to Image Modeler and Matchmover Pro in the RealViz days. And that tool specifically is how I got my job at Digital Domain.
Great.
I showed my demo reel, and I'd shown tracking, match moving that integrated Image Modeler as a way of creating a 3D model in order to track. And there, I had never worked feature films before, and they saw that on my demo reel and said, "Can you start Wednesday?" And it was because I had learned all of these things. So, and now I teach at a university, and so there are dozens and dozens of students out in the industry working that have learned. So that's just, you have digital great grandchildren all around the industry right now, thanks to that legacy. Thanks for sharing the Giga Macro, because actually I do have a group of students right now working on photogrammetry and 3D models of insects. So we have an Academy of Natural Sciences here that we're working on. And so I was going to ask, besides, renting a Giga Macro for, a few $1,000s per month or quarter, are there any tips that you have in addition to that or besides that in terms of macro photogrammetry?
Yeah. Focus stacking is there's other ways to do focus stacking, and one is to do it manually. So there's two different pieces of software that you can use for the stacking. One is called Zareen Stacker with a Z, Zareen. It's just slipping my mind what the other piece of software is.
And have you used Photoshop's photo stacking? Does that work at all? Or
I have, but
it's not as good.
Yeah, it's not as good. Basically what it does is it slightly expands the image and then aligns them and then just pulls out the sharpest part of each image. But focus stacking, you can do it manually. There are little rigs where you just turn a dial and camera just kind of creeps forward a few millimeters. There's another device. So Giga Macro is really for doing macro all over larger objects, larger spaces. It's used a lot by museums and stuff. It makes a lot of sense because they can take a whole drawer and they're just like scan everything in the drawer. But for people kind of doing it on their own, there's something called the Stack Shot. And I think that's more like on the range of $1,000. So there's kind of three different levels. You can go manual, go with something like Stack Shot, or you can do something like the Giga Macro. One cool thing is that photogrammetry works with stacked photos. So you can still run photogrammetry on it. You kind of have to loosen up some of the parameters because it's no longer like a totally real perspective, but it works.
That's awesome. And another thought I was curious about is, have you found any tools that are AI-based that are better than others, perhaps, for retopology? I know a lot of the kind of work that you're doing and that we're doing is preserving as much of that hyper detail you can get out of photogrammetry. But if you want to reuse that asset in something of
animation,
real-time graphics, like and like the artwork you were showing that was in the game engine, a lot of times optimizing that and optimizing the topology ends up being as much work as the photography itself. And so I was just wondering if there's anything emerging in that space.
I've been waiting for that to happen and thinking like, okay, it's going to be 3, 2, it's going to appear like really soon. But so far I've not found anything that I've been super excited about or that I integrate into my process regularly. I primarily work with still life. So most of what I'm doing is not animated. So I don't have quite the same needs for topology as if I were like doing humans, etc. There are good retopology tools out there, but they're definitely more like artist driven. So it's where you really have to go and put in the hours to make it happen. But I've always felt that one thing you can do in the photogrammetry that can help is to isolate different subjects, because the tools can take in mats. So one of my beefs about photogrammetry is like it needs to be a little more aware of what you're processing. So for instance, if you've got a street scene, it should know that all those wheels on the tires of the cars on the side of the road, they're all round and they're not connected to the road. Like that's the topology should reflect that, should have the topology of a wheel. And it doesn't know any of that. But if you segment out all the data, so you say like, okay, these are the cards, and Facebook has a great new AI tool called I think it's called Segment Anything or Segment Everything, and it can go through and just automatically identify all your objects, so that then if you're pumping that through photogrammetry, you can say like, okay, now let's do all the cars, now let's do all the wheels, now let's do the road, and you can kind of create masks for everything so they're all processed separately. So that's one approach that you could take that would at least improve the process, because the imagery is still dumb. It doesn't, if you're doing a human, you're like, humans have armpits and crotches. Like photogrammetry doesn't know that. Their elbows are connected to the sides of the body. So those are things that I think won't be too far out.
Thanks.
And actually, there's a piece of software called Context Capture that does do some of that, but it doesn't recognize the things that I care about most. It recognizes things like valves, and it's used a lot in like the gas industry and stuff like that. If you're doing some big industrial site, you can say like identify every pipe and every valve, and it will go through and do that.
Yeah, and I think that this is where like AI and a lot of machine learning and stuff like that is going to just blow this up in the next couple of years, because
that's right.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. Yeah. Go ahead, Courtney.
Thanks for being with us today, Gordon. I have a couple of questions. If you're you talked about structured light projection, and do you do that as a video or as a series of stills? And do you project the light and then capture a frame without the light on, so that you get the bitmap of the surface itself, which can then be applied to the 3D generated?
So the structured light. So you can certainly get a projector and get a camera and roll your own structured light
frames or something. Yeah.
There's lots of stuff around that, but what I'm referring to mainly is pre-built scanners that do this automatically. Mm-hmm. So it's projecting the light. Sometimes it's infrared, sometimes it's visible light, and it's doing it at video frame rates. So it's doing it pretty fast, video or faster frame rates.
So you can just freely move the camera around an object or rotate.
Yeah. Generally, you've got like a handheld scanner. The scanner might be size of a lunchbox, and you're just kind of moving it around as you're scanning. So you use it like a paint sprayer. If you mentally think about it as a paint sprayer, that kind of helps. The
handheld scanners, like you're talking about now, with cell phone cameras getting so sophisticated and with such sharper optics, do they have an array of cell phone cameras that have a high one, a medium one, a middle one, and a low one, all capturing simultaneously as you move around?
There have been some projects like that, but now the big thing that everyone's using is the LiDAR, the on-camera LiDAR, which is like just it's a low resolution depth image that you get that's right next to the camera. So like on the latest iPhones, I think since iPhone 13, maybe 11, I think probably 13, I think, where they first added the depth sensor. Turns out it's not great for creating geometry, but it can do it in real time. So with photogrammetry, one of the big things is that it takes a lot of processing. So generally all the phone photogrammetry apps, if it's taking stills that it's doing real photogrammetry from, getting you the beautiful detailed models, that's going up to the cloud, processing on a server somewhere, and then being downloaded back to your phone. What it can do locally on the phone itself is take that depth image and use that depth image to build up some geometry. You get something that's much more coarse, doesn't look quite as good, but it can build a model on your phone. So like, if you're
and then it can wrap the image, the photographic image, around that 3D structure.
Now the other thing that the depth camera gives you that is really important is it can help you identify the pose, so where the camera was, which way it was pointing. So it's like really good 3D tracking that you can get from the depth camera. So like all these like little phone photogrammetry apps, and I know, Alex, you're a fan of these. You use Polycam, right?
I think I use them mostly for fun, but I don't know how many times I've used them in a project. Sometimes when I'm trying to send somebody something real quick, like, hey, take a look at this, I'll go and scan a room. I don't think I've used Polycam, which is the one that I use the most, probably for anything that I got paid for. I mean, I usually step up a couple of notches, but I am constantly tracking it. Like it's constantly like, oh, eventually this is going to get a lot better.
Yeah, and I'm kind of doing the same thing. I'm always kind of doing check-ins to see, okay, exactly where is this right now? And for some of the Nerf stuff, it actually does do a very good job.
Well, we're gonna have you come back and talk. We're gonna have a whole second hour on Nerfs. Nerfs and splats.
Nerfs and Gaussian splats. These are the kind of modern things, and I've got lots of opinions and some experience with that. So, photogrammetry. Actually, though, I will say this is that a lot of people feel like this is the death of photogrammetry, and that's not true at all.
It's two different worlds.
Photogrammetry is still super valuable to have something that doesn't break traditional pipelines, where you have polygons, you have textures, have something that you can measure from, to have there's all these things that photogrammetry, and I've been shooting photogrammetry for 20 years plus, and I've run a lot of them through both, and it's surprising the number of times that photogrammetry still comes out better. Yeah. There are specific things that we've always wanted photogrammetry to do that Nerfs and splats can do. And I think it is the future, but
it's a little ways down
now. Yeah, the now is still photogrammetry.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, and Paul says, "Comment on the photogrammetry I did of my." Did I jump one?
I think you jumped.
Did it slip up there? Whoops.
Yeah, I think you got it from Tromsø. You might want to
there we go. Ketchefler Gersvold in Tromsø, Norway. Any advancements on photo scanning reflective and or transparent objects?
How do you approach that?
Yeah, this is where Nerfs and splats come in, actually. So light fields, Nerfs, splats, all of those work with these special cases that are difficult. But Otherwise, some scanners do a little better with materials. I think that there are some AI materials that are coming. Like this is something that we'll continue to see, and I've seen some advances on this, but nothing that's kind of off the shelf and production ready.
Next question.
Next one comes from Tommy Schatz in St. Paul, Minnesota. Is there a recommended minimum focal length equivalent go-to, or is it depends the answer, and how much overlap?
Depends. It feels like it's always the answer, but for everything, there are a lot of how long is a piece of string problems. I would say though, for focal length, it does depend on what your subject matter is. Mostly photogrammetry prefers wide lenses. If you think about it, it's kind of reaching out and getting all the different angles, and the wider the lens is, the more kind of leverage it has on figuring out exactly where that position is. So it prefers wide angle lenses. It does not many of the pieces of software work well with fisheye lenses. So you have to have a rectilinear lens, and kind of wide is better. I stick to something around like a 24 millimeters, kind of a sweet spot. I found, I really like the Zeiss glass, so I'll use a Zeiss 24 millimeter lens.
And you're using mostly fixed lenses, right? Because it's changing the focal length is problematic.
Yeah, that's the traditional knowledge. It's not really a requirement anymore. It used to be a requirement that you had to use fixed lenses because zooms have all these problems with breathing. Like it changes with temperature and they slide in and out as the weight shifts. The heavy glass kind of pulls it and changes the focal length slightly. Now all this photogrammetry software is so good at figuring out what those differences are that it doesn't really matter. You can use zoom lenses safely now.
Nick, do you add something to add there?
Yeah, I was going to second, of course, the wide angle and the fixed lenses of, the software these days is able to accommodate much. It seems to be much more accommodating. In fact, it used to be that I wouldn't do photogrammetry with anything other than raw photos with full EXIF information in them because the software was relying in part on the lens data that it was in the EXIFs, whereas video frames were usually not as effective before. And these days it's interesting. Video frames can be as valuable as still images, and you get more of them per second.
The one trick with video is you get rolling shutter. So if you have rolling shutter,
using a rolling shutter camera,
that can be problematic. There, you just have to make sure that when you're doing the calibration, you turn on the correction for rolling shutter.
And then one thing just to be aware as a user is that everything that's in the background of the image that you're filtering out, you're focused, your mind is focused on the subject, but it's everything in the background. The computer's going to see that too, and it's going to use that for its operations. And so if behind your subject you have a person walking around every once in a while, the photogrammetry software is likely to see that and it'll throw it off. So you really want to make sure that the background, the totality of the content of your images are static, that nothing is moving over the course of the photo shoot.
Next question.
That speaks to a part of our next question. It comes from Nickel Kemkohler in New Jersey, and he says, what techniques do you use when you're capturing a prop and you want to get its base, its top, and all sides? Do you move the background around it to keep any background clutter out? And or does it matter if you move the prop around?
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, so there's a technique for doing the tops and bottoms of props where you basically photograph the top half and the sides. Then in the software, you cut the model out so that you have only your prop in the model, and then you can render masks that go around everything in the model. Then you kind of save that piece out as a separate project. Then you flip the object over. You do the same thing, where you photograph the bottom side of it, and then you can merge these two projects. You can merge them and have them solve together. But it's about using the model itself to create a mask and mask out the background so that it's only finding control points that are on the surface of your object.
And Apple actually, some of their stuff is actually doing it automatically now with their little app that they have in the creation thing. It's just saying you can flip this over, or you cannot flip it over, and they're kind of trying to make it easy. Yeah,
all of that's getting easier, but there are some, depending on your photogrammetry tool of choice. I know Reality Capture has some excellent videos, tutorial videos on this, but I think it's a process that'll work with. The same technique will work with almost any photogrammetry package that has mask, which is all the ones that I know about right now.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas is up next with this. Rank these photogrammetry Lidar apps from best to worst in terms of usability and effectiveness. Metascan, Scaniverse, Sitescape, Measure, 3D Scanner app, Modelar, Dot3D, and RealityScan.
I guess the bigger question is, what are you using mostly right now for photogrammetry?
Yeah, a lot of those I've done. I've tested like 30 different iPhone apps and different things like that. I've done that for other companies, and I'm not super excited about any of them. And like Alex was saying, like if you're doing something professionally, you're probably just going to be grabbing a DSLR to do it. You're not going to be using a mobile phone.
What software are you using right now to do a lot of your photogrammetry? Is it
my biggest one is using Reality Capture. That's what I use more than anything else. In second would be Metashape. There's some things that Metashape can do that Reality Capture doesn't do quite as well, and those are kind of in both. Well, I guess now Reality Capture is going to be free now, so that's going to be a big advantage for a lot of people. And Epic now owns it, so it'll have some pretty good integrations and workflows for working with Unreal. Metashape has some capabilities that you won't find, but they're usually more like technical and engineering type uses. But one that I'm looking into right now is they can support aerial LiDAR. Like you can integrate aerial LiDAR. LiDAR that you can integrate into Reality Capture is only structured LiDAR. So that means it's mounted on a tripod and, a spinning laser mounted on a tripod of a standard type. So those are the two that I use primarily. There's other ones. I think Meshroom is quite popular. I've heard some good things about that. Context capture is great, but really expensive. There are more and more tools available, but right now the one that kind of has, if you're working in visual effects or film or interactive on the web or VR or virtual production, Reality Capture or Metashape. Metashape also has the advantage of, I think they have a Mac version too, where Reality Capture, not only do you have to have a PC, you have to have an NVIDIA card. So those are the requirements.
Next question.
Roz Humphreys in Comox, British Columbia says, can you tell us more about the BLK you used while rappelling down the rock?
Yeah, sure. Do you have any, I don't know if you can ask them a question, but if they have specific questions.
I think she's just trying to figure out which one you were using there. So there's a.
Oh yeah, the BLK to go is the one that's kind of the handheld. It's a little bigger than a coffee mug.
How much are those BLK to goes?
I think they're about $30K, something like that.
Yeah. It's a thing.
They're not cheap.
Oh, 55.
55. Yeah. What's 22K?
Here's what it looks like here. So this is the BLK to go. That's the list price. It might be less on the street. But yeah, this is the handheld that you're carrying down. It's as low as $1,200
Yes.
a month for your financing. But
And you can rent them. You can rent them too.
Right.
That's what I
And
do.
are you holding on to it here at this?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a handhold.
So you just grab onto it and start scanning. So
You don't get a strap for that much for a $55,000 handheld thing?
you know. Oh my gosh.
Well, the fun thing about this scanner is you can literally run around with it and it will scan a room as you run through the room. So it's great, like if you're working on set or something and you want a scan between takes.
Yeah.
You know, like if you want to figure out like exactly where the props are, where someone's handling a prop and they set it down, you want to know exactly where they set it down. You can literally grab the scanner and between takes, you can just walk across the set and you've got that data. So they're great because they're really fast. They don't have the accuracy of a lot of the other scanners. I mean, they're still very accurate. Like they're not sub-millimeter, but you probably get down to millimeter accuracy. They're great for interiors. They don't have quite the range, like if you're doing something the size of a parking lot.
But grabbing onto something that's hard, and again, I have a BLK 360, and it's it's relatively convenient. I mean, I can just walk around, hit a button, and keep moving. But it's not. But if I'm trying to get some specific thing, not 360, but I just need this object, handheld would be great.
Yeah.
Craig,
but it's a handy little device. Like I say, I rent them. I don't have one in house that I use all the time. Kind of with all the scanners, the thing is like if you're going to buy one, you got to make your money fast because in 2 years you're going to want a very different scanner. And
it's a fast moving technology right now.
It's a fast moving technology, and I get asked to scan all kinds of different things. I get asked to scan, Intel asked me to scan all of their tiny little chips that they built over history. So these are like macroscopic objects. Then I get, people want, entire landscapes or parts of cities and like everything in between. Yeah. And everything seems to require a different scanner or different scanning technology. So the choice to buy a scanner, you really got to be sure that you can keep it busy and making you money all the time to do it, which, people working in construction and engineering have no problem. If you're a big studio and you've got productions going on every day, that's no problem. Yeah. There's a lot of industries where it's no problem, but kind of if you're more of like an independent person functioning, then unless you're getting either a really, really, really big job or you're doing the same type of job every day, it's hard to make a purchase decision like that.
No, absolutely. Craig.
Or you can rent it out. If you have a good network, rent it out.
I'm always scared of renting that kind of stuff out. Like my BLK, I'm kind of like, it's been offered and I'm like, I don't think I think I'm just going to hang on to that. Like I don't want anyone else to touch it. So I think that's the problem.
Right. Like they're expensive to repair too, or they're expensive to show up and have it not work.
Yeah, really expensive to show up and not have it work. So Craig, it's been so great to have you. Really, really.
Yeah, it's great talking to you guys too.
It's so much fun. We might try to drag you on again, maybe to talk about splats and that type of thing. But we'll see if we can get you on for somewhere in the future. Maybe after SIGGRAPH, we'll talk about some of the new stuff. See if we can get you on to see what you saw there. But thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, sure, anytime. All right, it's good talking to you guys.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right,
and
bye.
And thanks to the panel. I can't do this without you. Great first hour and second hour there. And thank you to the incredible team on the back end that makes this all happen, that organizes it, that gets people in, that gets everybody ready to go. It's really quite a thing. And we've made this huge move, and the team has done such a great job in making that happen. So thank you to the back end, everyone that's been making that work. And thank you, of course, to the producers for all the great questions. And first hour and second hour, we can't do this without you either. This is the one show that everybody kind of comes together and makes this happen. So we really appreciate your contribution. Today, if we had to walk around asking these questions and didn't have the Tlaloc traversal, we would have traveled 70,000 miles. That's 113,000 kilometers, and that is 558 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. That was so much fun. Greg and I, every time we get together, and I went to check his mic yesterday. I think we talked for like an hour last night, talking about, we checked the mic real quickly. I was like, hey, yeah, that'll work. We started catching up again. It's great.
We probably have enough hours captured of all of our panelist faces to generate 3D
Yeah, exactly.
emojis.
Just throw it all into there. Yeah, we got to figure out a way to mass produce that. Yeah, exactly. We get 3D versions of us. It's coming. All right. See you, everybody.